Troublemakers. We did a soft launch last week, but today is the official opening, the ribbon cutting, if you will, of the Kennedy wing of the woodshed. And this could not be better timed because on Sunday night, CNN premiered its very important, I'll do my very serious Oprah voice. Very important, very serious part 1 of their 3-part documentary, imaginatively titled American Prince, JFK Jr. Now, I will give my notes on that episode in a moment. Not a recap, just critiques. But first, before it aired, I believe that morning, Marlena, our producer, caught this. I didn't catch it. And she texted me immediately and she was like, have you seen this? CNN held a little roundtable discussion as a teaser. Now, this brain trust consists of Stephen Gillian, I think, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I have his book right here somewhere. Anyway, he is the adoring JFK Jr. water boy / historian. We have Lisa DePaulo, who is a writer who once worked at John's magazine, George. Carole Radziwill, the Kennedy adjacent in-law, who, as I noted previously, will someday be found dead having huffed Kennedy fumes in a borrowed Hamptons garage. And a CNN talking head named Leah Wright Rigueur, if I'm saying her name correctly. I had never heard of her before. I've never seen her before. She also appears in this documentary. I don't know that she is a Kennedy scholar, a historian, a biographer, or an expert, and yet she has earned a place at this table to explain to all of us the importance and consequence of JFK Jr. and why it's worth CNN doing this 3-part documentary series to revisit his short life now. Now, as Leah talks, and again, if you're listening, I've got to implore you, watch this part of the show on YouTube because you got to keep your eyes on the expressions of the guys in the split screen as Leah is talking. Okay, let's go.
So the first thing is, America doesn't have royalty, but we do have royalty. And John F. Kennedy Jr. was royalty. He was America's prince. His father was, at one point, we don't have kings in this country, but was really the kind of epitome of a political dynasty. And so he was the heir apparent.
Steve Gillen, who's the second guy you see, he's taking in a breath and his face twitches. He's holding himself back from talking. I mean, are you kidding me? This is disgusting. This is just bottom of the barrel. This is not a brilliant mind. Okay. And neither, I'm going to say, Lisa DePaulo, once a well-respected journalist in New York City. I haven't seen her byline in forever. Now, here she is talking about John Jr. She went to work for him at George. Here she is talking about John Jr. as an editor-in-chief and as a boss. Let's do it.
How important was he? Imagine, how important was George to him?
It was him. It was his baby. He loved it, and he was there all the time, and he was involved in everything. He had such great instincts. He knew what a great story was. He knew what a great headline is, what a good cover was. And Carolyn, by the way, was very instrumental in that too. She had good taste.
Okay, first of all, JFK Jr. was there all the time. That's the job. He sold this magazine. He pitched it all around town. He sold it to the only person who was willing to make a bid because his pitches were so terrible. It's all an ask not. So give him a gold star. He was there all the time, which, by the way, he was not. He was always off. He could barely sit still. The guy had ADHD. Okay. He could barely sit still. So there are reports everywhere that he would be holding a meeting and he'd be like, you know what we should do, guys? Let's go play touch football in the park. Let's go bowling. He wasn't there all the time. Okay. Number one. Number two, he knew what a good story was. No, he did not. So he famously went to interview Fidel Castro. And he, Bay of Pigs, his father's big debacle as president, Cuban Missile Crisis nearly brought the world to World War III, nuclear annihilation of the entire eastern seaboard of the United States of America. He goes and he interviews Fidel, and then he never files a story. Oh, and the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal exploded. And this was the only story going. And you want to talk the moment politics and pop culture bled together, never to ever be torn apart again. It was Clinton-Lewinsky, and John Jr. refused to cover it on any level. His editors were like, we've got to cover it. We are a magazine about politics and pop culture. Jr. said, no, absolutely not. My father went through hell in the White House while he was statutorily raping young interns on his wife's bed while she was away, So yeah, John, what a journalist, what would you call them? Like whatever, a nose for news. Okay, now among the talking heads in this documentary proper, episode 1, Sunday night, is Tabitha Soren. Now, Tabitha Soren was an MTV News correspondent back in the early to mid 90s. I worked there as a baby. Okay, I was a baby intern, and then I became a production assistant. And so I remember her vividly. Her office was right outside my cubicle. And she was supposed to be like the smart one. She wasn't like the cool one, but like she was the smart one. And she started covering politics. And I remember her throwing a fit one day. She kept her office door open and she was like throwing a fit. And she was like, it was basically like, do you know how hard it is to be me and to be this famous at a young age? And like, I can't tell who my real friends are because everybody's always jockeying to be my +1 at like this rock show or this like big awards ceremony. I was like, get over yourself. Get over yourself. She didn't last very long. Anyway, she's in this documentary. Why she is, I have no idea. None. She didn't know John. She says as much in the documentary. She had no ties to his circle. She hasn't been working in media for over 30 years, as far as I can tell. So this tells us that CNN, their producers were scraping just to find people willing to play ball for this thing. And by play ball, I mean adhere to the script. And often this is like a little nugget that they don't tell you. But I've done enough of these things, like behind the scenes, the producers will like try to spoon feed you lines. They'll say like, okay, could you just say, that was good, but could you just say, John really knew, he knew what a great story was. Like they'll say, would you just say it? And then like, it's up to you to say like, no, I'm not going to say it because I don't think it's true. Again, I didn't get a phone call and we know why. We know why. Now, Kurt Anderson shows up. Kurt Anderson, another legendary magazine editor of the 80s, 90s. He was out of New York Magazine by the mid 90s. They fired him. He was really, really good at what he did. And he hired me at New York Magazine. Again, I was a cub reporter. I was cub. And he hired me and I was so excited to work there and I learned so much. And then we see Graydon Carter. So Kurt says in this documentary that he didn't really have a relationship with John Jr. either. But John Jr., when he had this brainstorm for George, called Kurt and said, would you have lunch with me? And Kurt said, sure, because who's not going to go to lunch with JFK Jr.? And Kurt in this documentary says, he struck me as very smart. And I think he's being polite. I do. Then we go over to Graydon Carter, again, from Spy Magazine. And then took over VF from Tina Brown, kept VF in sterling condition. Now, Graydon Carter, as far as I can tell, he's the only person talking sense here. Only person talking sense. He says, JFK Jr., what he should have done, instead of selling this magazine around town and installing himself as the editor-in-chief and the guy in charge, what he should have done was go work at magazines and sort of work his way up and learn the ropes. And then he would have known what to do and how to manage people and how to come at things with a point of view and how to differentiate George in the marketplace. But, he thought he knew everything. So much for that. Now, John Jr. says to a friend says this in the doc, literally, that after his mother died, that John Jr., was, quote, too young to be an orphan. He was 39 years old when his mother died. Like, that is an arrested person. If you are firmly in middle age, you are about to turn 40, and you consider yourself an orphan, that is an arrested person. And then, they sort of gloss over, oh, he was with Carolyn, and then he went back to his girlfriend, Daryl Hannah, but that was just for the press, so they would leave him alone. It's a very tortured explanation, and none of it rings true. First of all, they don't even mention that Daryl Hannah broke up with him after he took her dog out for a walk and got so distracted with his own crap that the dog got run over by a car and died. Okay? She was like, I'm out of here. You're a loser. And, his dealings with women, he was not great to women. He was always cheating on them and two-timing them. And, he ghosted Carolyn. He kind of made her life hell for a while, but that's all glossed over here. And now in comes Carole Radziwill. Carole Radziwill has been making the rounds, appearing on a number of podcasts. I have not yet seen her on morning television, on network morning television, which, as we all know, keeps the door open and unlocked for dwarf minds. Now, everywhere she goes, she is sure to be, and again, like they will ask you if you're doing an appearance like this, or you say to them, here's how I would like you to introduce me. These are my credentials. So she is sure to be introduced here as an Emmy-winning reporter for ABC News. That is a title that she's digging out of the mothballs. It's like decades old. She has not worked in news for decades. And then she is also sure to be introduced as a former Real Housewife of New York, if this is a laurel, like this is a laurel. And it reminded me of her final Inglorious season on New York. She showed up for the reunion, and it was really her versus Bethany. And Carole sat there. This is when you knew she had gone full. She had the Kool-Aid. She was bathing in the Kool-Aid. She wasn't just drinking it. She came onto the show and she was like, I'm cool. I'm a Kennedy. She wasn't a Kennedy, but she's like, I'm a Kennedy. I knew, John was my cousin. Do you know John? I just refer to him by his first name. And I'm too cool for you guys. And then she just went over the other way, and she sat there on the sofa and said to Andy that she was far too smart for the show and for her fellow housewives, because she had recently had an MRI done. I couldn't make this up. I could not make this up. This is literally what she said. I tried to find the clip. It's not there. She said, I had an MRI done recently, Andy, and it turns out, I believe I'm quoting verbatim, that I have a ginormous hippocampus, which means I'm a genius. Okay. So first, Carole told Us Weekly last week that she was dumbfounded. That's her word, dumbfounded, to learn that Ryan Murphy was doing a TV series about John and Carolyn. What was she expecting? A personal phone call? A request for the permission of the great Carole Radziwill? Listen, Ryan Murphy, only one vulture is going to continue feasting on those two carcasses, and that's one Carole Radziwill. So here's what she told Us Weekly in a piece dated Friday, August 8th, 2025. The Real Housewives of New York City alum explained that she had got on a, quote, bunch of dates in 2020 with the friend who auditioned to play Anthony, her late husband, who died of cancer 6 days after his 40th birthday in 1999. Her friend's call about the audition was the first time, really? She moves around in Hollywood circles, but she's claiming this is the first time she had heard about American Love Story. And I quote from Carole, I was so dumbfounded. I remember I was driving my 1998 little red Jeep around town. She's a cool girl, you guys. See, she has to get in the make, model, and year. 1998, little red Jeep around town. So I had to pull over. Even now, I'm like, I panic about it, she said. She's in panic mode. So she is in such a panic that she went on a podcast I had never heard of. This podcast is called We Met at Acme, which is an old hotspot in New York that doesn't exist anymore. It's like a 90s thing, okay? So already, this is like an exclusionary podcast. Like, who is this for? So here's Carole on why she thinks the world still needs to hear her warmed over boilerplate, non-insightful takes on John and Carolyn.
Because I think so much of the time she gets cast as just this like fashion girl. And she really, I know it's going to sound crazy, but she really wasn't. She wasn't caught up in fashion. In fact, if you look at a lot of the photos, she's just wearing jeans and a good shoe and a button down. And she was very simple. And it was the minimalist 90s, but also she didn't give that much thought to it. At night, she would pretty much wear one designer, Yohji Yamamoto. She was so much more than fashion. Mm-hmm. So if I can speak to that, I'm going to take that opportunity. And John, of course, was so much more than, the tabloid, trashy version of, who he dated and being the hunk and what he did at George Magazine, I think was truly revolutionary. I think it was so ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. I remember at the time when he was explaining it to Anthony and I.
Oh my God. Okay, let's go to town on this. When he was explaining it to Anthony and I, it's Anthony and me, okay? She likes to call herself a writer, a New York Times bestselling author. When he was explaining it to Anthony, here's a pro tip, Carole. If you're not sure which pronoun to use, remove the name of the other person and say, would you say when John was explaining it to I, or when John was explaining it to me? Secondly, Carolyn was not really a fashion person. She was one of Calvin Klein's top right-hand people. She was the very definition of a fashion person, and she cared a lot about how she looked. And when she met John and she was intent on landing this big fish, she began remaking herself to look not like the downtown hipster who hung out at Save the Robots that she was, but she wanted to reinvent herself to be a future first lady. So she she started losing weight at a rapid cocaine helped rate. She began bleaching her hair super, super white. She became super minimalist. She tried everything. Thirdly, they need Carole. So Carole comes in and she says, the world just thinks that Carolyn wasn't anything more than like a fashion girl who was kind of superficial. And that John was just like this tabloid hunk who hadn't really accomplished. All true. She says, so what did they accomplish, Carole? Just tell us. But she can't because it was nothing. After they died, so Camille Paglia, our beloved cultural critic, we talked about her incredible interview that she gave days after, I believe it was to Salon. And she basically said, what did these two do with all of their wealth and privilege and access? Nothing. And if anything, Carolyn diminished. Her life force diminished when she married him. And then Maureen Dowd at the New York Times, back when she was actually trying to put some kind of effort into her column, after they died, she wrote kind of a very similar column, which was like, Carolyn Bessette did nothing with her platform. She didn't had any charity. She wasn't involved in philanthropy. She wasn't taking on causes to bring them into the mainstream. She was shopping all day and doing coke at night. Get out. Okay, now here is Carole Radziwill. I love these kinds of I'm too cool for school. So here she is. And mind you, I read her memoir. I read it more than once when I was working on my book, and I read it before I ever thought about doing my book. In her memoir, she's like, I kind of grew up like a hick in upstate New York. I didn't come from money. So she's going to sit here and tell us that she was totally, thoroughly unimpressed to marry John F. Kennedy Jr.'s cousin. Now, I'm going to this is my own supposition. I think she wanted to be Carolyn Bessette. I think she was more in love with Carolyn than she was with her own husband. And I do think, of course, like a Meghan Markle, and there's a Meghan Markle adjacency here, she much would have just died to be the one John Jr. took a look at and was like, you're the one. You're the future queen of Camelot. Just like Meghan would have wanted William over Harry in a heartbeat. Okay, let's listen to Carole talk about how she was just, I'm not even going to go. Just listen. Here we go.
He was probably one of the most famous men in the world. Like, knowing him the way I knew him, it's funny to say that because, he was, John, Anthony's cousin and a really close friend. And but zooming back out, he was very, very famous.
Whoa, again, he was very, very famous. Carole, you fucking knew who the guy was. Anybody, we all knew who he was. And she's like, wow, he was really famous. But to me, he was just John. He was just Anthony's cousin. Just like Meghan Markle was like, Harry, I've met grandmothers before. It's just your grandmother. No, it's the fucking Queen of England. Fuckwit. Okay, next we're over at On with Kara Swisher, the insufferable Kara Swisher, who does not make a media appearance without letting us know that she knows Elon Musk's psyche because she knew him back 20 years ago. And I don't think he takes her calls anymore. I don't. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't. Okay, so anyway, Carole's being very serious on Kara's show because Kara's smart. So Carole's got to up her game. But before Carole weighs in, we hear from John's college buddy and colleague, Gary Ginsberg, who is also a producer on the CNN documentary. And he's telling us what a visionary John was and how, again, he was totally prepared to run this magazine. Here we go.
But it still was a tough sell, and they ended up partnering with David Pecker, who was then CEO of Hachette. Not the greatest figure in the world, not the top level of drop-drawer figure that John was, for example. Pecker would then go on to buy the National Enquirer, where we'd quote, catch and kill unflattering stories for Donald Trump. So talk about the funding and why that was difficult at the time. And what was it like working with Pecker, and why was it so hard to fund the concept?
Well, because political magazines back then, or actually any magazine, and John learned this when he went to magazine school.
Oh my God. Okay. First of all, it was hard to fund. I could tell you why. As I reported, he went into every pitch meeting asking these titans of industry for tens of millions of dollars. And his pitch was for shit. They all said he walked in and he was like, I'm JFK Jr. You're so lucky to be hosting me. You know who else was like that too? The brass at NBC. They gave Chelsea Clinton an on-air gig for a very short time and she flamed out and they just canned her. They said Chelsea was like that too. She was like, I'm Chelsea Clinton. You're lucky I allowed you to take this meeting with me, even though I want you to pay me millions of dollars to be an on-air personality. And I lack utter charisma or work ethic. Just my opinion. So also the magazine school that Gary references. This is so good. There is no such thing as a magazine school. No such thing as a magazine school. There's journalism school. And then there's working in magazines. But there's no such thing. So magazine school, as again, I wrote about, others have written about, Steve, JFK Jr.'s great friend Steve wrote about, JFK Jr. took a 2-day course in at the Learning Annex in New York. And it was called How to Start Your Own Magazine. 2 days. How to Start Your Own Magazine. And he came out of that ready to go. He had his diploma. Okay, finally, here is Carole telling Kara why it was totally cool for John to be angry with the very media. Again, this is all very Harry and Meghan. They are their direct descendants, the direct descendants of JFK Jr. and Carolyn. So Carole is explaining, again, a former member of the media, a former journalist, totally cool for John to be angry with the very media that he had joined for exploiting his lineage and his name, while he also used the media. Sorry, I'm getting confused. It's so circular. While he also exploited his own lineage to sell his magazine as it failed precipitously, as it began dropping off a cliff, like the Roadrunner, okay? Culturally, politically irrelevant. Let's go.
But then Drew Barrymore as Marilyn Monroe, I think, as that cover was a little bit more controversial. But, that's what you had to do. And it was a great cover. And, and John was...
That was the Happy Birthday, Mr. President cover.
Yeah.
But, John wasn't above, I think partly he'd been used so much by his history.
Which you note
that-
in the piece, the use, and Bessette was pushing up against that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, like, he was probably taking ownership, of some of these narratives and these stories about his family, and he was going to use it to his benefit.
Carole, it takes a far greater mind than yours, a way more sophisticated intellect to try to sell this load of horse shit, okay? That was one of the most cynical covers ever produced, I'm going to say, in American journalism. So he had Drew Barrymore dress up as Marilyn Monroe. By the way, John had asked his one time hookup Madonna to do it, and Madonna said no. Madonna, who did the sex book, had the good taste to say, you know what, that's a bridge too far. Your mother wouldn't love it. So Drew Barrymore dressed up as Marilyn Monroe on the night that she took the stage at Madison Square Garden and sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President, in a dress that was practically see-through to President Kennedy, basically announcing to the world that they were having a very, very hot sexual affair. And it was perhaps the greatest public humiliation. There were other private ones that I would say were worse, but that's how often the president humiliated Jackie Kennedy, John's mother. So what did John do but take probably definitely that most painful moment in his mother's life, but use it to sell copies of his magazines, okay? So you can fuck off. John's changing a narrative. You saved that for the housewives' couch. That's your narrative. This is mine. You're an idiot. Okay, then these two go on to blame the magazine's failure, George's failure, on people wanting it to fail. Who are these people? What is this cabal? What is this conspiracy? Because everybody was rooting this guy on, okay? And that it was everyone else's fault that it failed, except for John's. And that's, I'm gonna pound this version of the into dust. What if you could delay your next 2 mortgage payments and finally get a little breathing room? With American Financing, that makes this idea possible. If you are feeling stretched by everyday expenses, groceries, gas, bills piling up, you are not alone. Most Americans are putting these expenses on credit cards, and there doesn't seem to be a way out for so many people. But American Financing can show you how to use your home's equity to pay off that debt. So call American Financing today before it gets to a point where those payments just become impossible. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are helping homeowners just like you restructure their loans and consolidate debt, all without upfront fees. And their customers are saving an average of $800 a month. That's like a $10,000 a year raise. It's fast, it's simple, and it could save your budget. So call now before it's too late. 866-885-1332. That's 866-885-1332, or visit americanfinancing.net/nerve.